Hey folks, we've got another great edition of the Poetry Nook this week. I'm joined, as always, by my dear friend Analía Gómez Vidal, and this time we're tackling the topic of loneliness, something that can tend to set in a little more than usual, maybe this time of year. We're doing this through the lens of a few different poems, a couple of my favorites, and all of which are linked in the Substack post along with this video, as well as in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast version of this. Either way, I really hope you enjoy it.
And we're here in another Poetry Nook.
Another Poetry Nook. It couldn't come at a better time, Annie. I'm so happy to be doing this with you again.
Likewise. And it sounds like a very timely topic that we ended up converging on. So today we decided to explore a little bit the concept of loneliness and solitude, a little bit about what, sparked this is I have been going through this moment in time in which I was like doing a lot of self-reflection, and it was very hard to really come to terms with it. But then I realized that I was feeling lonely and I wasn't sure how to like articulate it. And I am not the kind of person that feels as comfortable sharing as openly when I am in that headspace. So I went to poetry. And that led me to propose this as a topic for today.
Loneliness, I think, is a very rich area for poetry. I have my, when I have my little database of poems that, that I like that I've kept over the years. And I always have little tags of like themes that I do. And I was like, I'm pretty sure loneliness was one of them. And lo and behold, like 20 poems popped up. I guess I'm attracted to poems about loneliness. And it's probably because, around the time I was sort of really discovering poetry, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, Annie, like, it was a time where I was feeling it was a significant period of loneliness for me. And I think probably one thing we'll sort of touch on today is poetry itself as kind of either a balm or at least like a contextualizer for loneliness so that it doesn't hurt so much. And I think we have a couple of poems today that all, I think, add something to the discussion in sort of making loneliness feel, in some ways, complicating it in a way that I think makes it easier to take on, easier to address within ourselves. And plus knowing that at least someone else, whoever wrote this poem, right, has dealt with this before, can be a little bit of like a safe haven.
Yeah, it can make us feel a little bit less lonely.
Yes.
And side note, yes, we will at some point discuss that very extensive system that you have for your poems, because I am fascinated by that. And we also say hi to Penny, who's like joining us today.
She is joining us. It's better here in my arms than barking at squirrels at the back door. So here she is.
So to get us started, each of us picked at least one poem that we would share today and we would discuss. So Charlie, do you want to get started with yours?
Yeah, sure. I only picked one, and he's an overachiever and picked many. So we'll see. we'll see how many of those we get to. But yeah, we'll start with mine. Mine is by the poet Naomi Shihab Nye. She's a poet, children's author. She writes, standard poetry and has written extensively and won awards for poetry for sort of expressly for children, which I really love about her. But this one is one I really like that made me laugh the first time I read it. And I think speaks to, it's speaking to me a lot right now. And Annie, I'm guessing we'll both find things to love or relate to about this poem. So this poem is called The Art of Disappearing. When they say, "Don't I know you?" say no. When they invite you to the party, remember what parties are like before answering. Someone telling you in a loud voice that they once wrote a poem. greasy sausage balls on a paper plate, then reply. If they say, we should get together, say, why? It's not that you don't love them anymore. You're trying to remember something too important to forget. Trees, the monastery bell at twilight. Tell them you have a new project. It will never be finished. When someone recognizes you in a grocery store, nod briefly and become a cabbage. When someone you haven't seen in 10 years appears at the door, don't start singing him all your new songs. You will never catch up. Walk around feeling like a leaf. Know you could tumble any second. Then decide what to do with your time.
I can see why. like, uh, so to anyone listening or watching, I purposely did not read the poem so that I would react to it while Charlie was reading. But he had told me, that a little bit about what to expect. And I did not expect this.
I mean, I know it probably, I didn't maybe totally follow the assignment. Like it's not exactly a poem about loneliness, but
Hmm.
I think it has a lot to say about loneliness and about how we relate to aloneness as a sort of state of being. I think there's a lot to say about this poem. I mean, I have the feeling, Annie, that there are times in our lives where both of us maybe can relate to this poem of
Hmm.
like, I don't want to have to tell another person about like my latest project that I'm doing. Like, I love my work, I'm excited about it, but like, I don't want to have to give the elevator pitch for my book one more time, or like,
Hmm.
where this this state of being like immersed in a whole bunch of people can be a lonely experience because you're just going through the same paces. And I think it helps expose this idea that loneliness does not always mean being alone, that you can, you can feel really alone in a crowd of people, and you can feel um, really connected and at home with the world, even if you're by yourself, even if you have sort of knowledge of people who are there for you and things like that. Um, and so I think there's a lot more we can dive into, but that's why I like this poem. I wonder if you have any like initial reactions to it or
Yes.
like lines that jumped out to you.
Um, so two things to me that stood out about this poem. The first one is the humor in it. I really appreciated that. I think like the images as described come to my mind as you're reading it. And then the other thing that goes connected to what you were saying just now about like what it has to say about, like loneliness and being alone and being in a crowd like this at a party or a similar situation. I think the word that comes to my mind is intentionality, right? Like there is that moment of pause that the poem invites you to take, of being like, before you reply, just think about this. Do you want to engage in this way?
Mm-hmm.
um and I think that this goes to what you were saying just now, like we have all found ourselves in those situations where we start that conversation and or continue that conversation, then once we wrap up we're like, why the heck did I do this? That
Yeah.
why? And so then one starts kind of like pulling the thread and maybe thinking, it's like, well, what was I craving that maybe I didn't find in that interaction? Or the line that stood out for me is, if they say we should get together, say why. Because we say it so much, and I think that as I am saying this out loud, I don't know if that was a thing that I had like incorporated in my usual conversations before moving here. Of like, oh, we should catch up, we should get together sometime, like, and it reminds me there is a similar question or interaction that to me was the pinnacle of loneliness when I first moved here. To me, there is a parallel between the "we should get together" and "how are you?" Because
Hmm.
I remember when I first moved here, and anybody would ask me, "How are you?" Even, when we were in grad school and we were in the grad lab and someone would ask, like, "How are you?" And I remember one time very truthfully answering that question, and it wasn't a fine.
Right.
And the response that I got was like, "Geez, tell me more."
Yeah.
As if, like, no, I asked you, "How are you?" just for you to say fine.
Right. Right. I didn't want you to actually tell me
Yeah. And,
how
and
you're
that,
doing.
yeah. And that created it's a little bit of a sense of a disconnect or loneliness in that moment of like, well, when I ask you, "How are you?" like, I mean it. And when I
Right.
ask you, like, "We should get together, we should catch up," I mean it. Unfortunately, we're
Right.
human and we don't have as much capacity and time, and then it becomes complicated and all that stuff. But there is a intentionality behind it. And what I love about the poem that is, take a second to ask yourself, why?
Right. Well, and that's why I think, like, I think a surface level reading of this poem could come across as like, oh, she's just like had it with people and doesn't ever like doesn't is a recluse and doesn't want to. But I I think she is subtly getting across that that's not actually the case. Like, I don't interpret her, the speaker of this poem, as being a recluse. Like, I see this as maybe like I saw myself adding context to this party she's at and the interactions of like, maybe it's at like the tail end of a long set of engagements and socializing. Like, maybe it was a book tour or something, and she is just done. She's drained. The social battery is gone, right? And she just needs some time alone. And this is where, like, there are a couple of different lines, but particularly the last stanza, where I think this really makes the poem. Like, up until then, it's sort of a funny, amusing poem about being overwhelmed by social engagements. But then she makes this point about all of this kind of hiding and secluding and turning into a cabbage in the grocery store and
Mm-hmm.
making yourself invisible and disappearing from people, kind of making yourself lonely as necessary to a certain kind of life, like that is required in order for you to rediscover how you want to reappear, how you want to actually be with people. Like what you were just describing with the sort of perfunctory "how are you," which is not a real "how are you." Like, I think at this party she was at, there were a lot of those.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody there was actually interested in how she was. They just wanted to be around her. They just wanted to like tell her that they wrote a poem once too, and like all of these things. And that she is tired of that. She's not tired of interactions with people. She's tired of meaningless interactions with people. And she needs to back off and fade away and become a cabbage, right? In
Mm-hmm.
order to rediscover what actual kinds of meaningful connections she does want to have. Because she's not, she's not saying like never talk to people. She's just saying like, ask yourself why, fade into the background. She says, this is a line I really like. She says, "It's not that you don't love them anymore. You're trying to remember something too important to forget." Like,
And
she's trying to
I,
remember that.
going back to the reason why intentionality came to my mind is because I think that there is a connection between, like halfway through the poem where like, there is like that why question. And then that last stanza of being, like, and then decide what to do with your time. Because
Hmm.
I think that, what you were saying about it is a call out to the performative element or nature of a lot of our interactions, but it's not without any other purpose. It's like it's calling it out to then bring us into this other element of, time is precious. So what do you want to do with it?
Right. Right.
Um, and I think that is also a really great segue to one of the poems that I selected. But before
Yeah.
we go in there, um, do you want to share any other like thoughts or insights before we do that?
No, I think just the like one thing I think this poem touches on that I think is important to recognize about loneliness is this sort of idea that the grass is kind of always greener on the other side. Sometimes that like sometimes when we're alone, all we want is like good company. But then sometimes when we're in loving company, like we get the company and then we're like, I just want to be alone right now. And that's a very complicated sort of feeling to hold within ourselves. It can be a frustrating thing about loneliness. So that's another thing I think this poem touches on that I just wanted to sort of give a shout out to. But I'm excited to hear one of your poems.
Yeah, and I will say I was planning on going to one of them, and then as soon as you said this last part, I switched immediately to the other
Oh
one.
boy.
Um, so the poem that I am going to read now is a poem by Lia Purpura. The name of the poem is Solitude, and I was not familiar with Lia Purpura and her work, but she's a poet and essayist from the U.S. and she wrote this, and she's a local. She lives in Baltimore in Maryland, and I read this poem, and it really had multiple layers for me, and I think that a lot of them touch like what we just discussed. So I will go ahead and read it, and then we'll take it from there. So this is Solitude by Lia Purpura. No one home. Snow packing the morning in. Much white nothing filling up. A view of birds pulling the silence until some dog across the street barks and breaks what I call my peace. What a luxury annoyance is. It bites off and keeps just enough of what I think I want to be endless.
I love that. I love it a lot.
um, so I'm curious to hear your first reactions
Yeah.
before I tell you more about what
Okay.
evoked for me.
I have a few. I mean the two lines that spoke the most to me because I'm not kidding, Annie. This is something I'm constantly thinking about. Is the line "what I call my peace," right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that last bit of just enough of what I think I want to be endless. Like what I love about this poem is it is getting to this disconnect sometimes between like, you know, on the one hand, we are, you know, humans, we especially like busy people, we say we crave peace and silence and quiet and time, like vast time to do whatever it is that we want, that we feel called to do, you know, curl up with a book or read a bunch of poetry or listen to music or something that isn't our work or isn't like our daily obligations. And then we get this peace and then we're not sure about it. And then we're feeling lonely or we've gotten this solitude and then it's not what it was cracked up to be. It's not what we thought it was going to be. And then, you know, something breaks it up like a dog barking or whatever. And it's just it speaks to this idea, I think, that peace and solitude and silence, these things we say we crave, are never exactly what we think they are. We can't control them. We want to control them, but we never can. I think Purpura does a really good job just really starkly laying out that like this is never going to be exactly what you want it to be, and that's an like it's an annoyance, but it's also a luxury, right? It's an acknowledgement that this is happening, and that and sort of trying to get us to a place of just accepting that solitude is never exactly what we want it to be. And I think
Yeah.
I like this is something I deal with myself all the time. I'm like, finally, it's like a Friday afternoon. I can kick back and do what I want. And then I'm like restless and I'm like, I better clean the house. And I don't, or like the dog, or literally like before we started, the dog was barking and it's like interrupting this special time Annie and I have. And so, but that's just life. It's just what it is. And so but I have difficulty accepting that sometimes. So I really appreciated this poem.
Yeah, I had a similar reaction in terms of kind of like showing the two sides of the same coin, right? Like we kind of like go between the wanting that space and that solitude and that reflection, but then also there is a very fine line between it being just enough and too much. But I also, what I really loved when I was like reading the poem for the first time is I I could put myself in that scene. I
Oh, yeah.
could see the snow. I could see the V of birds. I could hear the barking that breaks through the silence. And so I loved that so much. And then when digging deeper into these ideas around, like what is peace, what is an annoyance, what is feasible or not, I think like that was such a beautiful reflection of that, like that very fine line that we have to constantly walk when it comes to solitude and loneliness.
Yeah. And I think this is where I see sort of a connection between our two poems, where, in that last bit of this one, where, she's talking about, annoyance being a luxury, it bites off and keeps just enough of what I think I want to be endless, right? There is, we think there is like one state of being that is like the perfect state of being. And once we achieve that, we're good. And that, then that's the end of the conversation. But of course it's not. It never is, right? I mean, I don't know. I guess unless you're like a monk in a monastery or something. But like for most of us, right? We're constantly trying to get this one particular thing, but then it's never going to be interesting enough, or like we're gonna like part of the beauty of what we call our lives is this dynamism and
Mm-hmm.
complication and unexpected things happening and diversity and all of these things that make life what it is and make life really interesting. And an entire life, sitting inside with the snow piling up and a V of birds and just being by yourself, like after a few days, that gets old. Like, this is, I mean, I don't think this is what this poem is about, but I'm thinking about like the pandemic and being
Mm-hmm.
inside, and that, there was that sort of meme of people early on being like, oh, the introverts of the world, like our time has come, like this is. And look, I put myself in that category a little bit, and like there was some sort of dark luxury, right, of being able to like be inside and not have to leave the house, and like, but like I think even the most introverted of introverts, that got old by like April or May of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that speaks to the fact that like in this poem, and I think in the poem I read as well, she's talking about like, it's not that I want to be alone for the rest of my like and be away and have that total solitude. It's just that I, want it to be meaningful, and I want to be able to accept it as it is, rather than having like no control over it at all. It's not that I don't want that dynamism and that complication. It's just I don't know. It's
That
we want it to
balance.
be perfect. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's yes.
and I think that this goes into, like you were talking about the acceptance part. And I think there are two sides to that acceptance. There is the acceptance of, there are moments in time in which like you want that solitude and you want that space. There are moments where you don't necessarily want it, and then it can feel lonely. Um, but there is also an acceptance that we don't fully have control over that, and that walking back and forth is part of our human nature, which I think that is like it's the picture that it's like starting to come from these poems and discussion. And I do want to bring in, there are two very short like poems from Rupi Kaur that I came across that I think are in dialogue with each other, but also that speak to this. And I was saying to you before we got started that I don't necessarily agree with the sentiment behind some of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, the two poems is one, it reads, "Loneliness is a sign you are in desperate need of yourself." And the other one is, "Fall in love with your solitude." I think that the fall in love with your solitude sentiment speaks a little bit to what we are just discussing, right? Like understanding that there is that side of us that we all need in some capacity, whether you are more of an extrovert or an introvert, you might have different degrees of need of quiet time and solitude to connect with yourself. But it is something that I feel that as a society, we are consistently conditioned to run against it, when in reality it's like such a fundamental part of what allows for
Right.
us to feel grounded and
Yeah.
wholesome.
Yeah. And there's, I mean, I think related to that, it's like we often treat our lives and our sort of state of loneliness or non-loneliness as like trying that there is this destination we need to reach, and that it can, not just it will, but that it even can be a permanent state once we reach it. And whereas actual life is much more like you're walking maybe in a line and there's a line you're trying to follow, but really you're walking a little too far this way, and then you make a correction, and then you overcorrect, and then you sometimes in life you spend time a lot of time alone, and you spend a lot of time on one side of the line, and then you work your way back towards, and like some of your directionality is up to you and some of it is not. Some of it's up to other people and some of it is just up to like blind luck and chance and what the world throws at you.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we, I mean, Annie, like I'm thinking of in grad school, like we used to talk about like statistics and methodology and
Mm-hmm.
like how to estimate a particular point on a line, and like, but we all understood that we were like doing these regression lines and things, but like very few of the actual way a reality is observed actually sits on that point, right? We're just trying to sort of
Mm-hmm.
come up with a way of talking about how whatever phenomenon we're studying goes
It's
in.
more about the distributions.
Right, that's right. Like actual life looks a lot different, and it helps us understand things, and we can, like, we're always sort of trying to come up with like things like, oh, like what are situations that I know if I put myself in that I'm not going to have a good time and it's going to throw me off that path. And like that's helpful to know, but you kind of never know. And so you need to, so like that's what spoke to me a lot about the last Rupi Kaur poem, little mini poem you read about, falling in love with this, because that's a much bigger ask than just like being okay with it. It's, and that's what reminds, I mean, I'll just say one more thing, which is that it reminds me of a poem I know we both love that we've talked about before, The Guest House, where like you are not just being okay with some of these uncomfortable feelings and complications in life coming in, you are welcoming them in, and you are treating them as guests in your home and letting it be what it is, and then they come and they go, and it's not this permanent state that I was talking about. It's things changing always, and just learning to love that, not just be okay with it but to love it, which is really hard.
And there is an element here that I think it's very important throughout the conversation, that it's agency, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when you fall in love with your solitude, when you welcome all of the emotional experience, however that feels, when you accept that there is kind of like this balance beam that you walk on all the time, it's not a passive enterprise. It requires a deeper sense of agency, of being okay with, being where you're at, and at the same time understanding that there are other forces around you that are contributing to your reality. And I think like that's part of the reason why I Also, one of the poems that is in my list is Wild Geese, which we might get to in a minute. But I also wanted to make the point because I read both of Rupi Kaur's short poems, and the Fall in Love with Your Solitude really spoke to me. The one that I didn't necessarily resonate with, and I have a very pointed argument for why, is loneliness is a sign that you're in desperate need of yourself. Because the way that I'm thinking about solitude and loneliness is like they are connected, but they're different in nature. When I'm thinking about solitude, I'm thinking about making a space for oneself with oneself. It's an internal process. But loneliness to me is a relational process.
Right.
So
Right.
I embrace my solitude. I love and need my solitude at times. But loneliness is about how I feel with and around other people. So you can love your solitude and still feel lonely. And you can also be surrounded by people because you don't like your solitude and you can still feel lonely. So the sentiment of, like loneliness means that you need to go back to yourself, I don't agree with, because I think that that speaks more to solitude than it does to loneliness.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I I I am in, I think, total agreement with you. I think that that first I think it's an interesting short poem, but I think it undersells what loneliness actually is and the power of loneliness. Um, that I mean, to like, if I were asked to define loneliness, I would sort of characterize it as the exact opposite, as a longing and a need for others. Like, I mentioned the pandemic earlier. Like, I think the pandemic turned me into an extrovert. Like, I thought of myself as I was just saying, I thought of myself as a very introverted
Mm-hmm.
person, and how, oh, like in some ways this is like nice or whatever. I mean, I never really thought about it in those terms because it was like a horrible thing, but
Mm-hmm.
like that's how a lot of people thought about it who don't crave as much social interaction. Ever since, like, people started getting vaccinated and the pandemic started sort of coming to like some version of a close throughout
Mm-hmm.
2021, I was like wanting to go out with my friends like 3 times a week, like always wanting to go out to dinner with my partner, and like always wanting to leave the house. And that has sort of stuck around to an extent I did not expect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in part because I think that period of, the sort of 12 to 18 months of like sort of the depths of the pandemic, like created such it stifled my supply of r- relationships,
Mm-hmm.
like true in-person relationships, and forced all of, I mean, this is a whole other box of things we could talk about, but like forced all of my relationships online and on a
Mm-hmm.
screen. That is, our conversations notwithstanding, so unsatisfying in this, like uh compared to actually like sitting across the table from someone. And it has, and I don't think I'm alone in this. Like, I think like I have continued to, like, it created such a stifling of that supply that there rose in me such a demand to like sit around a table with people, which comes with all kinds of frustrations and these other things that aren't perfect, right? That we think it will be, but it still provides such a richness that I think it highlighted for me how important loneliness is and how much it deserves our attention and realness with what it actually is.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I think I had the opposite experience. So I've always thought of myself as a extrovert, and if you look at my schedule pre-pandemic, it was insane. Like I would
Yeah.
get up in the morning, stay all day on campus working my assistantship or like classes and all that stuff. And then I would go to improv classes or improv shows and I would perform and then come back home like by midnight and then the same, like pretty much. And I would have, I would be at the theater like 4 to 5 nights a week at times. Because it was also, like the thing that balanced me from grad school and like all the work talk and all that stuff. And so when I look back at this now, I'm like, where the heck was that energy? And so what happened was like the pandemic, I did struggle a lot in the pandemic with, like I was missing being with my friends, hugging my friends, being able to like see them and all that stuff. But then after, I have become a lot more attuned with my own needs in terms of interaction with others. And I think of myself more as an ambivert these days because
Hmm.
I have my extroverted times, but even when we go to conferences, like we saw each other in person like a couple of years ago at APSA, and we hang out, and then I need to like go by myself in my hotel room and just like stay quiet for the rest of the night to then
Yeah.
go through the whole day again the following day
Yeah.
and so on. Um, but I think that both experiences in many ways speak to the fact that, like understanding those levels of solitude and loneliness and figuring out what we need at each time is very contextual. It changes it over time. And so, I think like what like sticks with me is this idea of the agency that we have to get to know ourselves in a way that serves those needs at each point in our lives.
Yeah, and that can be really difficult even to do with our even just thinking about ourselves and what it can be hard to know what we want, right? I think the Purpura poem gets at this really well, that it's we think like if there's anyone in this world who we would be able to say like I know what they want, we would think it would be ourselves, but sometimes that's incredibly hard. And I think, especially with all the changes we've been talking about, if we're thinking about loneliness, like you're also needing to kind of think about what it is that other people need and the people in your lives need who like might help fill whatever void is there in terms of your loneliness. But it's also thinking about what do they need. Like if I'm thinking about the Shihab Nye poem that I read, like this seems like there are a lot of people who are not thinking about what the speaker of the poem needs, and she knows what she needs to like do. I mean, frankly, it sounds like your pandemic experience was like a forced version of what she talked about, of like, okay, there's a lot here. I've been forced to kind of back away here. And now I can try to like come at some contextual, like arriving at of what it is I actually need and want. And that this space has created um kind of a space to rethink what it is I actually need.
Um,
And that can be hard to know.
Speaking of that, I only want to do a mention because I know I texted you at like 10 p.m. halfway through this week, I think, about this. And if there are any listeners who know where to find this, please send us a message. Um, there is a poem that I found that I only found in Spanish, and I can read it if you're willing to like give it a try. It's a poem by Mario Benedetti, a Norwegian poet, that it's called Soledades, Solitudes. And it actually speaks to what you were just saying about the relational side to this. Um,
I'm happy to hear it. If you want to read it, I'll do my best to pick out some parts, and maybe you can help me out afterwards if you want
I'll,
to.
yes, so I will read it and then we'll test what you caught, and then I'll tell you why I'm bringing this up.
Okay.
Ready?
I'll do my best. I'm probably not going to do a good job.
Here we go. Soledades by Mario Benedetti. Ellos tienen razón. Esa felicidad, al menos con mayúscula, no existe. Ah, pero si existiera con minúscula, sería semejante a nuestra breve presoledad. Después de la alegría viene la soledad. Después de la plenitud viene la soledad. Después del amor viene la soledad. Ya sé que es una pobre deformación, pero lo cierto es que en ese durable minuto uno se siente solo en el mundo, sin asideros, sin pretextos, sin abrazos, sin rencores, sin las cosas que unen o separan. Y, y es en esa sola manera de estar solo. Ni siquiera uno se apiada de uno mismo. Los datos objetivos son como sigue. Hay 10 centímetros de silencio entre tus manos y mis manos. Una frontera de palabras no dichas entre tus labios y mis labios. Y algo que brilla así de triste entre tus ojos y mis ojos. Claro que la soledad no viene sola. Si se mira por sobre el hombro mustio de nuestras soledades, se verá un largo y compacto imposible, un sencillo respeto por terceros o cuartos, ese percance de ser buena gente. Después de la alegría, después de la plenitud, después del amor, viene la soledad, conforme, pero que vendrá después de la soledad. A veces no me siento tan solo. Si imagino, mejor dicho, si sé, que más allá de mi soledad y de la tuya, otra vez estás vos, aunque sea preguntándote a solas, ¿qué vendrá después de la soledad? How much did you catch?
Words and phrases here or there. It
Mm-hmm.
was longer than I thought it would be, so I ended up losing a bunch of it. I heard I thought I heard something around, you can love in solitude, or you can have love in or like I heard phrases like without texts, without recordings, without some portion there that
Mm-hmm.
maybe. So I know some words, but
Got it.
I
So
would not say I got the whole gist of the poem. So you can help me out.
what I love the most about this poem is that it really makes a point of solitude being and loneliness more so than solitude being hand in hand with other parts of our lives, especially with the joyful parts of our lives. After love comes loneliness. After joy comes loneliness. And the part that that made me really want to read it now as we were talking is that last stanza refers to how the writer of the poem feels like a little bit less lonely when he knows that he's not the only one thinking and wondering what comes after
Hmm.
love and loneliness. And so, in imagining this other person and the distance that they have between them, being connected by this wondering of what comes next, is that they feel less lonely. And I just absolutely love that sentiment.
I mean, when we are craving the company of other people, or when we are craving connection with other people, um, and this is something I think about a lot with my work, in thinking about like how, like I study things like Congress, and it's like how at its base, like what is the relationship between like a representative in Congress and their constituents? Like what are voters actually looking for? And they're looking for commonality. They're looking for someone they're looking for understanding, someone who understands them, who there's familiarity with. And that familiarity can be created in a lot of different ways. It can be, you know, sitting around a table having dinner or having beers or something, but it can also be created just by possessing the knowledge that, and the understanding that other people are feeling the same way that you do, that you may be sort of physically alone or in solitude, but you are literally not alone in your feeling. And that like there is this great sort of brotherhood, sisterhood of people out there who have similar feelings that you do, um and that, like, knowing that that's out there is can be very comforting and help you do some of those things, like make connections between, like, what if you're feeling really lonely, it means that you love, right?
Mm-hmm.
It means that, like, maybe there's an absence of the kind of connection you want right now, but it means that you can love and want to have these connections. And that's a blessing, right? It can be a lonely one, but it is a blessing. And knowing that other people are craving that too, I think is a really beautiful sentiment.
And there is this sense of what's communal and
Mm,
the being part of something bigger that I think, like, to your point, you you have that sense of connection. And so, like, we I feel like we're coming full circle, especially because, like, now we're about to wrap up, and I
yeah.
think, like, this is a perfect moment for wild geese, because we started with, like, the wrestling between solitude and loneliness, and what's internal and, like, what's reflections and what's actually more relational and with one another, and the agency that it requires for us to really understand our needs and others. But there is also this bigger element, which I think is, to me, the biggest draw to wild geese, which is, it's not just about person to person, it's about person to environment as well.
Yeah. I totally agree. Annie, would you be really mad if I read Wild Geese
Go for
aloud?
it.
Thanks. Okay. Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
It gets me every time.
Every time. I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason. So, like, this is probably one of the best known poems in the world, and there's a reason for that. It's one of the all time. I mean, she's one of the all time greats, and this poem is an all time great poem. It's like a perfect poem.
it I think that, and I think that is the perfect way for us to wrap up this conversation, because of, like, those last verses of, like, announcing your place in the family of things. Like, no matter how lonely you are, no matter how much you wrestle with, like, the internal and the relational aspects of solitude and loneliness that we've been talking about, you have a place in the bigger scheme of everything that happens around us. And sometimes when we don't feel that connection is when we feel the most lonely.
I think that's exactly right, and I think my favorite part of this poem is that it's yes, it's announcing your place in the family of things as it is in all of its complications. And I think this is where it connects really nicely with these other poems that we've read, that, like, she didn't choose a beautiful for the bird in this poem. She didn't choose a perfect, like, beautiful swan, or like some other bird that you think of being, like, ethereal. It's like, it's geese. They are harsh and exciting. They are they can be annoying, but they're also beautiful in their own way, just like life is. And that, knowing that everyone else is in that same complicated, beautiful boat that you are in, it doesn't make life less hard necessarily, or less complicated, but it can make you less lonely. And I think I love ending with that poem. It'll be hard not to try to end with that poem every time we talk, but we'll find others.
Well, but I also hope that our discussion about loneliness and solitude, and all these poems that we have enjoyed and shared today, have also contributed to others feeling less lonely.
I hope so too. It made me feel less lonely, so thanks for making me less lonely today, Annie. It was fun
Thank
as
you.
always, and I can't wait to see you next time.
I will see you next month.